Welcome back to Techvisa. This is episode number 18, and today we're going to take a look at the independent skilled visa options for permanent residency in Australia. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel for all the latest in Australian immigration news and visa updates. So generally speaking, permanent residency visa options are split into two main categories. You have employer-sponsored visas and independent skilled visas. So we've already covered the two main pathways to permanent residency through the employer-sponsored program, and the link to those two videos will be in the description below. But today we're going to primarily focus on skilled independent visa options for permanent residency in Australia. These include the Subclass 189 skilled independent visa, the Subclass 190, which is a skilled nominated visa, the Subclass 491/191, which is a regional skilled visa, and lastly, the Subclass 858, which is the global talent visa. So the Subclass 189, as the name suggests, is an independent visa, meaning that you do not require employer sponsorship or state nomination. It is a points-tested visa, and before you apply, you need to be invited. So let's take a look at the application process. The first step is to submit an expression of interest. So this is the stage of the application process where, based on your work experience, skills, qualifications, and personal circumstances, your points will be calculated. It is important to note that you do need to complete the expression of interest as accurately as possible, because when you are invited, you do need to provide evidence to support the claims made in the expression of interest. Once you are invited, you can proceed to make the application for the 189 visa. First and foremost, you will need to have a suitable positive skills assessment. It's important to note that this is a time of application criteria, so you do need to have this on hand when you lodge your 189 visa application. Moving on to the age requirement, you do need to be under the age of 45 when you're invited to apply for the 189 visa. You can still apply for the 189 visa if you turn 45 after you're invited to apply. You need to have at least competent English, and you must have an occupation on the corresponding skilled occupation list. And finally, you need to ensure you meet the health and character requirements. Now let's move on to the points. Now I want to spend a little bit of time on this final section as there's some crucial elements to it. 65 points is the bare minimum you need to lodge an expression of interest. But it's important to note that applicants are invited based on the number of points submitted by other applications with the same occupation. For example, if you're applying as a software engineer and other applications for this intake for the 189 visa in the same occupation are averaging about 100 points, you will need to submit more than 100 points in order to stay competitive. In addition, the department can change their priority as to which occupations they're inviting to apply for the Subclass 189 visa. So currently, the department are prioritizing teaching and healthcare occupations. So these include health professionals, school teachers, health and welfare support workers, childcare center managers, medical scientists, counselors, psychologists, social workers, and medical technicians. So in addition to prioritizing certain occupations, the department also put a cap on the number of visas in which they'll process under each visa subclass. These are based on migration planning levels. The 2023-2024 allocation for the Subclass 189 visa is 30,375. And finally, current processing times are around 11 to 12 months. So moving on to the 190 visa. So this is very similar to the 189 in many ways, except the main key difference is that you need to be nominated by a state or territory government in Australia. It is also a points-tested visa, and before you apply, you need to be invited. So let's take a look at the application process. So before you apply, you do need to submit an expression of interest. So same as the 189 visa, this is the part of the application where, based on your skills, work experience, qualifications, and personal circumstances, your points will be calculated. As mentioned, the main difference with the 189 and 190 visa is that you do need state or territory nomination. So therefore, when you submit your expression of interest, you do need to allocate a specific state or territory government. Once you submit your expression of interest, this will be visible to the state and territory governments. So let's take a look at the overarching eligibility criteria for the Subclass 190 visa. It is important to note that each state and territory government has their own criteria when deciding who they will nominate. You'll need to have a suitable positive skills assessment, and again, same as the 189 visa, this is a time of application criteria. So you do need to have this on hand when you lodge your 190 visa application. You also need to be under the age of 45 when you're invited to apply. So same as the 189 visa, if you turn 45 after you're invited to apply, you can still proceed to the visa application. You need to have at least competent English, have an occupation on the corresponding skilled occupation list, and ensure that you meet the health and character requirements. Finally, same as the 189 visa, you do need to have at least 65 points to apply. Again, 65 points is the bare minimum cutoff in order to lodge that EOI. As all skilled visas are subject to the same ministerial direction for processing priority, the same priority occupations apply for the 190 as they do for the 189. As previously mentioned, the department are currently focusing on teaching and healthcare professions. Again, these include health professionals, school teachers, health and welfare support workers, childcare centre managers, medical scientists, counsellors, psychologists, social workers, and medical technicians. Planning levels for the subclass 190 visa are very similar to the 189 in that they have an allocation of 30,400. And current processing times are between 11 and 12 months. So the next visa we'll be looking at is the 491/191. I've done it in this way as the subclass 191 visa is the permanent residency pathway from the provisional 491 visa. If this doesn't make sense, don't worry, we'll explain it as we go. So let's firstly take a look at the provisional part of this application, which is the subclass 491. This visa is very similar to the 190 visa in that you do need to submit an expression of interest before you're invited to apply for the visa. But the main difference here is that you have the option to either be nominated by a state or territory government or sponsored by an eligible relative. As this is also a points-tested visa, you will need to be invited before you apply. So let's take a look at the application process. The first step is that you need to submit an expression of interest. This is the stage of the application where, based on your skills, qualifications, prior work experience, and personal circumstances, your points will be calculated. And if you have the skills they need, a state or territory government might nominate you for the visa, or you'll be invited through an invitation round if you've been sponsored by an eligible relative. Let's take a look at the overarching eligibility criteria. You'll need to have a suitable positive skills assessment. And again, this is a time of application requirement, so ensure you have this on hand, ready to apply for the visa when you are invited. You need to be under the age of 45 when you're invited to apply. Same as the 189 and 190 visa, if you turn 45 after you're invited to apply, you can still lodge the visa application for the subclass 491. You need to have at least competent English, have an occupation on the corresponding skilled occupation list, and ensure you meet the health and character requirements. And finally, although this is not necessarily part of eligibility criteria, you do need to live in a designated regional area in order to abide by your visa conditions. Same as the 189 and 190 visa, you do need to have at least 65 points in order to lodge an expression of interest. The great thing about regional visas, as in conjunction with the latest ministerial direction, they do receive priority processing. The same priority occupations apply as per the 189 and 190 visas. Planning levels for the regional visa are 32,300 for the 2023-2024 financial year. And processing times for the family-sponsored stream are between 9 and 20 months. And for the state-nominated stream, you're looking at about 9 to 12 months. Now let's move on to the permanent residency part of this application, which as mentioned is a subclass 191. The eligibility criteria is relatively straightforward as it's predominantly based on the previous visa you held prior to making the application for the 191 visa. So you will need to have held the subclass 491 visa for at least 3 years prior to making the application for the 191 visa. You will need to satisfy the income requirement, and although there is no specified minimum, you will need to provide evidence of income for 3 years in the last 5-year period. You will need to have complied with the visa conditions of the subclass 491 visa, and finally you need to ensure you meet health and character requirements. The processing times for the subclass 191 visa are between 22 and 81 days. The expedited nature of the processing times are based on the department's focus on regional visas. Now let's take a look at the subclass 858 Global Talent Visa. This is a highly specialized visa. The application process and document requirements are complex, so this is something to be fully aware of before making this visa application. For full transparency, I highly recommend getting in touch with a firm like Techvisa, who has extensive experience with global talent visas. But moving on, let's take a look at the application process. The first step is to submit an expression of interest. Once you're invited, you're free to apply for the global talent visa. So you need to have a nominator. They need to either be an Australian organisation or an Australian citizen who can attest to your exceptional achievements and talent. You'll need to have an internationally recognised record of exceptional and outstanding achievement. You need to still be prominent in your field and need to be able to evidence a record of recent achievements. You need to show that you'll be an asset to the Australian community and be able to establish yourself in Australia. You'll need to have at least functional English, and there is no age requirement to apply for the Global Talent Visa. And finally, as with all permanent residency applications, you will need to ensure you meet the health and character requirements. As this visa only appeals to a relatively small cohort cohort of applicants. The allotted numbers for the current migration planning levels are 5,000. And finally, processing times for the global talent visa are between 6 and 11 months. If you did enjoy this episode, be sure to give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to our channel. Until next time.